I discovered it in the 8th minute of my workday. A tiny glitch in the tertiary load balancing subsystem that 99% of the people in our company wouldn't even notice. Just a slight increase in response, time 52 milliseconds instead of the usual 37. To most people that's nothing, but to me it's like a red flag waving right in my face. "Good morning, Denby," I heard a loud voice behind me. "What? Are you fiddling with your obscure numbers again?" Lionel Rye, the system administrator and perhaps the only person at TechCorp I could call my friend. He was tall, gangly, with perpetually disheveled dark red hair and a habit of wearing t-shirts with images from old video games. Today he wore a pixelated spaceship defending itself against waves of alien invaders. 15 milliseconds, I answered, keeping my eyes on the monitors. What? The system response time has increased by 15 milliseconds. That's not normal. Lionel grinned and placed a cup of coffee in front of me. Only you, Tegan, only you can worry about milliseconds on a Monday morning. Normal people worry about hangovers or upcoming meetings, both of which are solvable problems. But if the system starts to fail, we'll all have to find new jobs. Lionel rolled his eyes but didn't say anything. He'd long since gotten used to my paranoia about the system. It wasn't paranoia, though, but a healthy concern. I'd built this data management system 4 years ago when TechCorp was just a startup with a dozen employees. Now we had almost 200 people, 3 floors in an office building in downtown Milwaukee, and the whole shebang was held together by my brainchild. Not that anyone recognized that. I took a sip of coffee and immersed myself in the code. 20 minutes later, I found the source of the problem, a small bug in an update that rolled out Friday night. Nothing major, just some junior developer hadn't checked compatibility with one of my core modules. I quickly wrote a patch, tested it in the sandbox, and sent it out for deployment. Response times were back to the normal 37 milliseconds. "Did you solve your global problem?" Lionel asked, returning from his round of the server room. "Uh-huh. One of the newbies stepped on the same rake that Jackson did last year. I fixed it, but we should rewrite the documentation, make it more idiot-proof. You should delegate more tasks. We have a whole development department." I just shook my head. Delegate? Sure. If only someone really understood how the system worked. I had tried to explain its architecture to other developers many times, but either their eyes glazed over at the first minute of explaining the data metamodel, or they only grasped the surface level without understanding the underlying relationships. The system was complex not because I made it that way on purpose. It just grew organically, along with the company, with new features and functions. I knew every nook and cranny of it, every feature, every potential source of problems. "Tegan, the meeting's in 10 minutes, came the cold voice of Audra Webb, our department head. She stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed as always in a dark blue suit. Her short blonde hair was styled so perfectly it looked painted on. The look in her gray eyes was always a little irritated, especially when she was chatting with me. "What meeting?" I asked, not hiding my displeasure. Meetings were a waste of time, especially Monday mornings, weekly planning, and something else important. Don't be late. She turned and walked away, heels clacking on the floor. "What's wrong with her?" I muttered. "Hadn't you noticed? She's been on edge since last Wednesday," Lionel said, lowering his voice. "They say they're introducing a new CEO soon." "What happened to the old one? You seriously don't know? Bradley resigned 2 weeks ago. It was all over the corporate newsletters." I shrugged. Corporate newsletters were automatically filtered into a separate folder that I checked once a month, if at all. Melissa, my ex, always said I lived in my own world, shutting myself off from reality with monitors and code. I guess she was right. "So, who's going to be the new director?" "Nobody knows for sure. Some guy from Silicon Valley. They say he's a big proponent of innovation and optimization." Lionel said the last word with an expression as if it were something obscene. Optimization, I repeated. That's good. I know optimization. It usually means layoffs and redistribution of workload. Don't be so pessimistic. Maybe he really knows what he's doing. I just chuckled in response. Over the past 10 years, I've seen too many companies fall apart after new CEOs came in with their innovative approaches. Usually, it ended with key people leaving and the remaining ones trying to keep what could still be salvaged afloat. Glancing at my watch, I sighed and got up from my desk. The meeting was 5 minutes away and the conference room was at the other end of the floor. Come on, Lionel. Let's find out what big news Audra has for us. The conference room was almost full when we entered. Along the long table sat the heads of departments and leading specialists. I noticed a few unfamiliar faces, apparently newly hired employees. The company was growing so fast that I didn't have time to memorize all the newcomers. I sat down in my usual seat in the far corner, where I could watch from the shadows. Lionel settled down next to me, immediately taking out his phone and immersing himself in some game. At precisely 10 o'clock, Audra entered the room, accompanied by an older man in an expensive suit, whom I had never seen before. Gray hair, a confident gait, the look of a man used to being listened to. "Good morning, colleagues," Audra began. "Before we get to the usual planning, I have an important announcement to make. As you know, 2 weeks ago, Michael Bradley decided to retire after 12 years at the helm of our company. Today, I am pleased to introduce you to TechCorp's new CEO, Mr. Hambert Elias." The man in the suit nodded and smiled as he looked around the audience. His smile looked like a politician's in front of the cameras. "Mr. Elias has 20 years of experience leading technology companies," Audra continued. "He has spent the last 5 years leading Innotech in San Francisco and has taken the company global. We are confident that under his leadership, TechCorp is poised for a new phase of growth." Hambert Elias took a step forward and placed his hands on the back of the chair at the head of the table. "Thank you for the introduction, Miss Webb. I'm pleased to join the TechCorp team. Michael has done a great job building this company from the ground up, and I'm proud to continue his work. However," he paused, "times are changing and we must change with them. In the coming weeks, I plan to hold a series of meetings with each of the department heads to better understand the current state of affairs and identify areas for optimization and innovation." I glanced over with Lionel. Here it is. Optimization. Exactly what I was talking about. "I want to pay special attention," Elias continued, "to our technological solutions. In today's world, victory goes to those who keep up with the latest trends. Artificial intelligence, cloud computing, big data, all of this should be the basis of our work." I felt the muscles in my neck tense up. This man spoke fancy words without realizing what was behind them. Our system was already using elements of machine learning and processing terabytes of data. Not the latest technology, of course, but it worked consistently and efficiently. And stability in our business was worth more than fancy solutions. Therefore, Elias looked around the room, I invited an external consultant to help us assess the current state of our technological solutions and suggest ways to modernize them. Mr. Amyas Vaughn will be joining us next week. He is one of the leading experts in modern information technology and has worked with companies such as Appleton Data and Western Systems. At the mention of Appleton Data, I couldn't hold back a quiet chuckle. This company made headlines last year when their new, innovative data processing system crashed on the first day of launch, leaving thousands of customers without service for an entire week. If Amyas Vaughn had anything to do with that failure, we should have prepared for the worst. Audra gave me a warning glance and I pretended to cough. "Now," Elias said, sitting down at the head of the table, "let's move on to current matters. Miss Webb, please bring me up to speed." The next hour was spent discussing current projects, timelines, and resources. I was mostly silent, intervening only when it came to the capabilities of the system. Whenever I started to explain technical details, Elias looked at me with barely concealed impatience, as if I were speaking a language he didn't understand. When the meeting was finally over, I felt exhausted, even though I hadn't spoken for more than 5 minutes. This was the effect I always got from people who thought they were experts in everything, without having a deep knowledge of any field. "What do you think?" Lionel asked as we returned to our desks. "About the new boss?" I shrugged. "Typical manager. Lots of pretty words, little insight. And this consultant, Amyas Vaughn, you heard of him? Only that he's connected to Appleton Data, which is not a good recommendation. We got to my desk and I could tell something was wrong. A warning was flashing on one of the monitors, a problem with the response time again, now 64 milliseconds. "Oh shit," I muttered, dropping into my chair and starting to check the system. "What is it?" Lionel asked, looking over my shoulder. "Same bug, only worse. It looks like my patch didn't work, or the problem is deeper than I thought." I opened the logs and started going through them, line by line, looking for anomalies. In a few minutes, I was fully immersed in my work, forgetting about Lionel, the new director, and the mysterious consultant who was supposed to show up next week. The system was my world, and in that world, something was going wrong. Until I dealt with this problem, everything else could wait. The hours flew by. I didn't even go out for lunch, asking Lionel to bring me a sandwich from the cafeteria. By 5 o'clock in the evening, I had finally found the source of the problem, not a simple update bug, as I had first thought, but a more serious conflict between two subsystems. Someone had made a change to the financial reporting module without coordinating it with the rest of the architecture. I checked the change history and saw the signature A.K. Alan Crosby, a new developer who joined us a month ago. Talented guy, but overconfident. Decided he could change the system's core code without consulting me. The fix took another 2 hours. By the time I was done, the office was empty. Only the light in Audra's office told me I wasn't completely alone. I stretched, feeling my back crunch after sitting in the same position for so long. The system was working normally again, the response time back to baseline. Tomorrow I'd have to talk to Alan and explain to him why the core shouldn't be touched without consultation. Shutting down the computer, I gathered my things and headed for the exit. As I passed Audra's office, I heard muffled voices. She wasn't alone. A man's voice sounded vaguely familiar, the new director, Hambert Elias. "We need to do a full audit of the system," he was saying. "I've been going over the financial reports for the last year. We're spending too much on maintaining this infrastructure." "The system is stable," Audra replied. "Tegan maintains it almost single-handedly." "Exactly. One person shouldn't be so indispensable. It's a risk to the company." "Denby knows the system better than anyone. He created it. Still, we can't depend on one employee. Amyas will evaluate and suggest options for modernization. Maybe we should consider going with a standard solution instead of a self-written system." I froze in place, unable to believe my ears. Replace our system with some off-the-shelf solution? That would be a disaster. Our system has evolved with the company, taking into account all the peculiarities of business processes. No off-the-shelf solution could provide the same level of integration and efficiency. "It's a big decision," Audra said after a pause. "Data migration will take months, and we can't guarantee that there won't be problems. That's why I invited Amyas. He's an expert in such transitions. By the way, he's flying in this Friday, not next week as I announced. I want him to meet your Denby." "What's his name?" "Tegan Denby. He's the lead developer on the system." "Uh-huh. Okay. Set up a meeting for Friday. I want Amyas to have full access to the system for analysis." I backed away from the door and walked quickly to the elevators, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. So the new director wants to get rid of my system, and probably me too. One person shouldn't be so indispensable was a direct threat to my position. Stepping out into the cool evening air, I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this Amyas Vaughn would appreciate the system for what it was and suggest reasonable improvements rather than a complete replacement. But something told me it wasn't going to be that smooth. Something in Elias's tone said that the decision had already been made, and this whole evaluation was just a formality. I walked to my car, immersed in my thoughts. The system was more than just a job for me. I had put 4 years of my life into it, countless hours of debugging, improvements, extensions. I knew every line of code, every API, every table in the database. And now some consultant was going to come in and declare that it all needed to be thrown out and replaced with an off-the-shelf solution. Not so fast, I thought as I got in the car. The system isn't as simple as they think it is, and I'm not as easily replaceable. Starting the engine, I had already begun to form a plan. If Amyas Vaughn wants full access to the system, he'll get it. But there are parts of the system that no one knows about but me. Things I'm not adding for official documentation, but for my own peace of mind. "Let's see how your expert handles this," hammered Elias, I muttered as I drove out of the parking lot into the Milwaukee evening. The TechCorp office greeted me with an unusual bustle on Friday morning. Usually, by the end of the week, everyone was working in a relaxed mode, looking forward to the weekend. But today, people were moving faster, talking quieter, and looking more tense. Lionel met me at the elevator, shuffling nervously from foot to foot. "You haven't heard yet?" he asked instead of greeting me. "Heard what?" I took a sip of coffee from a cardboard cup I'd bought on the way over. Elias called an emergency meeting at 8 in the morning. All the department heads. They'd only been back 15 minutes ago, and they'd all been down in the dumps. I looked at my watch. It was almost 9 o'clock. So the meeting had been going on for over an hour. What happened? Lionel looked around and lowered his voice. Reorganization. Elias announced a new course and structural changes. Haley in HR says the layoff list is ready. I felt my heart skip a beat. So it had begun. It's only been 4 days since Elias was introduced, and he's already started the purge, working fast. Did Audra say anything? She locked herself in her office right away. But from the look on her face, I'd say our department's under attack too. We walked over to my workstation. I turned on my computer and, while the system booted up, thoughtfully twirled a cup of coffee in my hands. "You're not worried, are you?" Lionel asked with mild surprise. "You're not going to get fired. Without you, the whole system would collapse." I shrugged, trying to look calmer than I really was. New managers do stupid things. They want to show they're in control before they know what's really going on. Then they're very expensive stupid things. Lionel shook his head. Elias wants to show efficiency gains by the end of the quarter, like cutting costs by 20% but increasing productivity. Mathematically impossible. I started to look through my email. Among the usual notifications and newsletters was an email from Audra marked urgent. Opening it, I frowned. "Tegan, the meeting with Hambert Elias and consultant Amyas Vaughn is today at 11 o'clock in Conference Room B. Prepare a brief presentation on the system, no more than 15 minutes. Minimize technical details. Attendance is mandatory." "Great," I muttered. "Now I have to explain the system to people who can't tell the difference between a database and a spreadsheet." "You've been summoned to Elias's office?" Lionel glanced over my shoulder. "Wow, Vaughn will be there too. Consider yourself honored." "What honor? You don't know who Amyas Vaughn is?" Lionel looked at me with disbelief. Last year, Tech Future magazine listed him as one of the 30 most influential people in the IT industry. He'd led the systems migration at Western Digital, launched a cloud service for global tech, and had a hand in the failure at Appleton Data, I added. "That's a rumor," Lionel grumbled. Officially, he wasn't even there. Of course he wasn't. When things go wrong, consultants are the first to disappear from the horizon. I closed the letter and opened the system structure. If I'm going to make a presentation, I need to prepare something simple enough for the business people to understand, but still demonstrate the value and complexity of the system. You'd better not argue with him, Lionel warned. They say Elias doesn't tolerate objections. 2 department heads have already been demoted for questioning his plans. Demoted? In 4 days? I whistled. He doesn't waste any time. That's right. So just be, more diplomatic than usual. Lionel went to his desk and I immersed myself in the preparation of the presentation. 11 o'clock came too quickly. 5 minutes before the appointed time, I made my way to conference room B, located next to the CEO's office. Opening the door, I saw 3 people. Hambert Elias sat at the head of the table, looking at something on a clipboard. Audra took a seat to his right, her back straight, her hands folded on the desk, her face impenetrable. Across from her sat a man I was seeing for the first time. It must be the same Amyas Vaughn. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40 years old. His dark hair was neatly styled. His expensive gray suit fit perfectly. His white shirt with cufflinks and on his wrist a watch that cost as much as my annual salary. Amyas looked like a man who'd stepped off the cover of Milwaukee Business Magazine. "Ah, Mr. Denby," Elias looked up from his clipboard. "Come in. We've been expecting you." I sat down next to Audra, placing my laptop in front of me. She didn't look at me, maintaining a stony expression. "Allow me to introduce myself," Elias continued. "This is Amyas Vaughn, the lead IT consultant. Amyas, this is Tegan Denby, our—" He paused, glancing at Audra. "Lead system architect," she prompted. "Yes, system architect," Elias nodded. "Tegan designed our current data management system." Amyas smiled and extended his hand across the table to me. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Tegan. Heard a lot about your system." I shook his hand, noting the firm shake and perfect manicure. "Likewise," I replied dryly, "though I'm not sure you'd actually heard anything about our system until this week." Amyas's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Don't underestimate my training," he said gently. "I've been studying Tech Corp for 3 weeks now." 3 weeks? So he'd been invited before Elias's appointment. Interesting. "Let's cut to the chase," Elias interjected. "Tegan, Miss Webb said you had prepared a presentation?" I nodded and opened my laptop. "Yes, I'll show you the basic components of the system and how it works." Connecting the laptop to the projector, I began the presentation. I intentionally simplified the diagrams, removing most of the technical details. But even in this form, the system looked impressive. Dozens of interconnected modules that process data and ensure the operation of all business processes of the company. "As you can see," I explained, moving from slide to slide, "the system integrates the work of all departments: finance, logistics, customer base, production. Everything is connected in a single network. The data is processed in real time, allowing for instant response to changes." Amyas followed the presentation closely, occasionally making notes in a small leather notebook. Elias watched with visible impatience, drumming his fingers on the table. "And how much of this architecture is up to modern standards?" he asked when I had finished explaining the database structure. "The system is constantly being updated," I replied. "We implement new technologies as needed. The last major update was 3 months ago when we integrated the predictive analytics module." "But the code base is pretty old, isn't it?" Amyas intervened. "I noticed in the documentation references to structures developed 4 years ago. That's a long time for the IT industry." I felt my jaw muscles tense. "The core of the system is time-tested and proven to be reliable. We don't change what works well." "I understand," Amyas nodded. But modern solutions often offer more flexibility and lower support costs. For example, cloud infrastructure. We already use a hybrid model, I interrupted. Part of the system runs in the cloud, part on our servers. It's an optimal balance between security and flexibility. Amya smiled again, but his eyes remained cold. Sure, but a complete switch to cloud-based solutions could significantly reduce hardware and personnel costs. Here it was. Reduce staffing costs. Now I knew exactly where the wind was blowing. At the expense of data security, I objected. Our customers trust us with sensitive information. A complete move to the cloud would create additional risks. Risks can be minimized, Amyas easily parried. Today's cloud providers offer the highest level of protection. And they regularly report data breaches, I added. There was a tense silence in the room. Audra gave me a warning glance. Elias coughed. I think we're getting off topic. Tegan, continue with your presentation. I went back to the slides, talking about the monitoring and failure prevention system. Amyas didn't interrupt again, but I could feel his appraising gaze. In conclusion, I said, moving on to the last slide, I would like to point out that our system provides 99.9% uptime. In the last year, there have only been 2 minor incidents that we resolved within an hour. That's a reliability rate above the industry average. Impressive, Amias nodded. But what is the cost of maintaining that reliability? How many resources are we spending to maintain the system? Less than the cost of downtime due to failures, I replied. 1 hour of system downtime costs the company about $30,000 in direct losses, not counting reputational damage. And yet, Elias interjected, I looked at the IT budget. The cost of maintaining internal systems is almost 40%. That's too much. Those costs include other systems, not just mine, I countered. Plus, server hardware, software licenses. Nevertheless, Elias raised his hand to stop me. I think we should evaluate alternatives, off-the-shelf solutions from leading vendors, cloud services. All of these can significantly reduce our costs while maintaining functionality. I looked at Audra for support, but she only shrugged her shoulders slightly, as if to say, "There's nothing I can do." Mr. Elias, I said, trying to speak calmly, off-the-shelf solutions don't address the specifics of our business. The system we're using now was created and developed with the company. It is adapted to our processes, not the other way around. Business processes can be adapted, Elias said. After all, we are not the first company in the world to work in this industry. Standard solutions exist because they are effective for most cases. I could feel the irritation building up inside. This man was ready to redesign the whole company for the sake of nice numbers in the quarterly report. The standard solution would require a complete data migration, I said. That's months of work, the risk of data loss, staff training. That's why I invited Amias, Elias smiled. He is an expert in such transitions. With his guidance, we can minimize the risks. Amias nodded modestly, but I could see the same smugness in his eyes that Elias had. I'd like to study the system in more detail, he said. I'd need full access to all the documentation, source code, and databases. I tensed. Full access? That's like giving your house keys to a stranger. Some parts of the system contain sensitive customer data, I countered. We can't grant full access without appropriate non-disclosure agreements. Of course, Amias nodded. All the necessary documents have already been signed. Right, Mr. Elias? Elias confirmed. The legal department has prepared all the agreements. Amias will have the necessary access from Monday. I felt a chill go through me. Everything's already been decided without my knowledge or consent. They're going to dig into my system, looking for flaws, preparing the ground for its replacement. I see, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Anything else? Yes, Elias nodded. Starting Monday, you'll be working directly with Amias. He should get a full understanding of the system, including aspects that may not be covered in the documentation. I have a lot of ongoing tasks, I began. They can wait, Elias cut him off. This is a priority project. Miss Webb, please reassign Mr. Denby's duties so that he can concentrate fully on working with Amyas. Audra nodded without looking at me. Okay, if there are no more questions. Elias stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. Then we'll continue on Monday. Amyas, do we still have time to discuss the financial aspects before your flight? Of course, Hambert. Amyas stood up as well. Tegan, nice to meet you. I look forward to our cooperation. I nodded silently, gathering my things. As Elias and Amyas walked out, Audra put her hand on my shoulder. Tegan, I know you're not happy, she said quietly, but try to cooperate. Elias is serious about change, and it's better to be with him than against him. He's going to destroy what we've spent years building. I gritted my teeth. And you know it. I know we all want the company to thrive, she replied diplomatically. Perhaps some changes are necessary. Change, yes. Complete destruction, no. Audra sighed. Just try to be flexible. Elias values loyalty. I value common sense, I countered, closing my laptop. But it seemed to be in short supply around here. I left the conference room with a heavy feeling. On the way to my desk, I noticed that the office was even quieter than it had been in the morning. People were whispering, many glancing nervously at Elias's closed office door. Lionel was waiting for me at my desk, shuffling impatiently from foot to foot. What's up? He asked as soon as I sat down. It's exactly as bad as I thought it would be, I answered, turning on the computer. They want to replace our system with some standardized solution, and this Vaughn guy will have full access starting Monday. Shit, Lionel whistled. And you? I've been assigned to him as his assistant. I'll show him where everything is so he can throw it all away. Maybe it's not so bad? Lionel suggested uncertainly. He seems to be a good specialist. Maybe he can evaluate your system and tell Elias it's great. I just chuckled. Lionel's naivety sometimes amazed me. Vaughn doesn't get paid to praise existing solutions. His job is to justify the need for change. He'll find the flaws, even if he has to make them up. I opened the system's code and started looking at the modules that Amyas is likely to address first. If he's looking for vulnerabilities and flaws, I need to be prepared to defend myself. There's something else, Lionel said, lowering his voice. While you were in the meeting, the first list of layoffs came out. Only administrative staff and junior positions so far, but everyone says this is just the beginning. Who's being hit? Officially, no one knows, but Haley whispered to me that some technical departments are next. Elias thinks our development staff is too bloated. I shook my head. It's a typical old-school management mistake to cut the people who create the real value. What about you? I asked. Are system administrators going to be cut too? Lionel shrugged his shoulders. Who knows? If they move everything to the cloud, half my job will be gone. All that would be left would be user support and the local network. They won't, I said firmly. At least not as fast as they'd like. Lionel looked at me carefully. Do you have a plan? Not yet. I closed the code and opened the documentation, but there's still time to think about it before Monday. Lionel was silent for a moment, then asked cautiously, You're not going to do anything risky? Definitely not, I smiled. I'm just going to protect what I've created. The system belongs to the company, but the knowledge of it is mine. Don't overdo it, Lionel warned me. Elias isn't the kind of man who forgives resistance. And I'm not one to give up without a fight, I replied, returning to my paperwork. I spent the rest of the day organizing the information about the system and mentally preparing for my meeting with Amyas on Monday. Whatever Elias and his consultant had planned, they would soon find out that replacing my system was a much more difficult task than they had realized. Toward evening, the office began to empty. It was Friday, the end of the workday. People were rushing home for the weekend. But I stayed put, immersed in my work. I needed to prepare for the coming confrontation. Around 6 o'clock, Elias and Amias passed my desk, heading for the exit. They didn't notice me, absorbed in their conversation. "I completely agree," Elias said. "The system seems overcomplicated. We could cut costs considerably by switching to a standard solution. And the development staff could be optimized too," Amias added. "Most of the functions will be supported by the vendor. We don't need such a large team." "That's exactly what I told the board," Elias nodded. "We will be able to show significant savings in the next quarter." They walked on, their voices hushed, but I'd heard enough. It was even worse than I'd realized. They'd already made a decision without even studying the system properly. The meeting, the access to the code-all formalities to give the appearance of validity to a decision made in advance. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the anger building inside. 4 years of work, thousands of hours of programming, debugging, improving, and they want to throw it all away for a nice line in the financial report. "Hey, you still here?" Lionel's voice snapped me out of my gloomy thoughts. He was standing next to me with his jacket in his hands, ready to leave. "It's almost 7 o'clock. "Yeah, I'm working," I answered, trying to collect my thoughts. "Friday night?" Lionel shook his head. "Even for you, that's too much. Come on, let's go have a beer. You need a distraction." I hesitated. On the one hand, I really needed to get ready for Monday. On the other hand, maybe Lionel was right and I needed a little distraction to get a fresh perspective. "You know what?" I said, closing the programs. "You're right. Let's go get a drink." I grinned, shutting down the computer. We walked outside. The evening Milwaukee greeted us with a cool breeze and the lights of advertising signs. Heading toward the nearest bar, I tried to push thoughts of work away, but they kept coming back. I wasn't about to let Hambert Elias and his consultant ruin my program for short-term gain. "What are you thinking about?" Lionel asked as we sat down at a table in the bar. "About Monday," I answered honestly. "And what's going to happen next?" "Come on," he waved his hand. "It's Friday night. Let's just forget about work for a couple hours." I nodded, but I knew I couldn't get it out of my head. Monday started with rain. I stood at the window with a cup of coffee, watching the drops drumming on the glass, and prepared myself for the day ahead. Amyas Vaughn was due in the office by 9 o'clock, and I was to spend the day with him showing him the inner workings of the system. I came to work earlier than usual, at 7 in the morning, when the office was still almost empty. I needed to prepare, to refresh my memory on some aspects I hadn't touched in months. "You're early today," came a voice behind me. I turned around and saw Cordelia Flint from the legal department. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, wearing an impeccable gray suit. We rarely crossed paths. The lawyers lived on a different floor and usually only interacted with management. "Getting ready to meet the new counselor," I said, sipping my coffee. Cordelia nodded, moving closer to the window. "Amyas Vaughn." "Yes, I've heard. He made quite an impression on the board of directors. Something in her tone made me wary, too neutral, too cautious." "Had you met him?" I asked. "I was preparing a non-disclosure agreement and other documents," she paused. "Tegan, can I ask you a question?" "Sure." "Your system. How legally protected is it? Patents, copyrights." I frowned. "It all belongs to the company. I developed it as a Tech Corp employee. And the source code? All the algorithms, all the methods?" "Mostly, yes. Although I created some of the basic components before I joined the company and just adapted them." Cordelia looked thoughtfully out the window. "And you can prove it? Do you have any records? Documents that prove that these components existed before you were employed?" "Why would I do that?" Now I was finally getting suspicious. Cordelia lowered her voice. "I shouldn't say this, but be careful with Vaughn. His agreement with the company is unusual. In what way? In the sense that he gets the rights to any modifications to the system he proposes, and any enhancements to existing code. I felt a chill go down my spine. That's a strange condition for a consultant. Exactly, Cordelia nodded. Usually consultants work for a flat fee, but Vaughn had insisted on special terms, and Elias agreed. I remembered the conversation I'd overheard on Friday. Total system replacement, optimizing the development staff. Now the picture was even more ominous. Thanks for the warning, I said. I'll be more careful. Cordelia looked around again, making sure we were alone, and added, one more thing. Human Resources is preparing a new wave of layoffs. I saw the list. Your name's on it too. I froze, looking at her. Are you sure? Positive. I've been going through the paperwork Elias ordered me to do. The plan is to lay off 30% of the technical staff, including you and Audra Webb. Audra? I couldn't hide my surprise. But she's in favor of all these changes. Apparently not actively enough, Cordelia shrugged. Elias wants to bring in his own team. The layoffs are scheduled for next week, right after Vaughn finishes his evaluation of the system. Why are you telling me this? I asked bluntly. It's not like we've barely spoken before. Cordelia smiled slightly. Let's just say that I appreciate people who really work for the good of the company, not for their own personal interests. And I'm not crazy about Elias's methods, but that's between you and me. She glanced at her watch. I gotta go. Good luck with Vaughn. And Tegan, be prepared for the worst. Cordelia walked away, leaving me with a cup of cold coffee and heavy thoughts. I was about to be fired. And not just fired, but, by the looks of it, siphoned all the knowledge about the system out of me beforehand to give it to Vaughn. I went back to my desk, turned on my computer, and started methodically going through the system code, making mental notes about what parts I should show Vaughn and what parts I shouldn't. If he wanted to use my designs to create his own product, he'd have to do better than that. At the beginning of 9, the office began to fill with people. Lionel showed up with 2 glasses of coffee and a bag of donuts. Figured you'd need an extra dose of caffeine for socializing with a tech genius, he said, placing one of the glasses in front of me. Thanks, I took a sip. You have no idea how right you are. Is something wrong? Lionel looked at me carefully. You have the face of someone who's gotten bad news. I hesitated. Should I tell him about Cordelia's warning? On the one hand, he had a right to know that mass layoffs were being prepared. On the other, I didn't want to create a panic, especially if the information was confidential. I just didn't sleep well, I lied. I was getting ready to meet Vaughn. Lionel didn't look convinced, but he didn't insist. Well, hang in there. And I'm right here if you need me. He went to his desk and I went back to looking at the code. Audra showed up half an hour later looking tense and tired. Tegan, she stopped at my desk. Vaughn's already here, waiting in conference room A. Are you ready? As ready as I can be, I replied, closing the code editor. Try to be cooperative, Audra said quietly. Elias is keeping a very close eye on this project. I looked at her, wondering if she knew about the impending layoffs. Does she know her name is on the list too? But Audra's face remained impenetrable. I'll do my best, I said, standing up. Conference room. A was the largest in the office with panoramic windows and a view of downtown Milwaukee. Amyas Vaughn sat at a long table surrounded by papers and with an open laptop in front of him. At my appearance, he looked up and smiled his rehearsed smile. Tegan, it's good to see you again. Likewise, I lied, taking a seat across from him. I've been going over the documentation you provided, Amyas began, adjusting the perfectly ironed cuffs of his shirt. Impressive, though somewhat unconventional. The system was designed for the company's specific needs, I replied. Standard solutions are not always suitable for specific tasks. Of course, Amias nodded. But that's the beauty of modern platforms. They are flexible enough to adapt to different requirements. And most importantly, they're supported by large teams of developers rather than depending on one person. So there you have it. First, fallout. The system is fully documented, I parried. Any skilled developer can figure it out. And yet, Amyas tapped his finger on the code printout. Some parts look overly complex. This transaction processing module, for example. Why the multiple levels of validation? For security, I answered. Each layer checks different aspects of the transaction, from simple data integrity to compliance with business rules. But it increases processing time and requires more computing resources, Amias objected. Modern systems use more efficient methods while maintaining security. I struggled not to roll my eyes. It's a classic trick to criticize what works perfectly, offering vague, more efficient methods without specifics. The next 2 hours passed in similar discussions. Amyas methodically went through various aspects of the system, each time finding something he thought could be made more efficient, more modern, or more standard. I defended my solutions, explaining the logic and advantages of the chosen approach, but I felt that my arguments were not achieving their purpose. Vaughn had already decided that the system should be replaced and was only looking for confirmation of his position. At noon, Amyas suggested we take a break for lunch. I have to meet with Hambert to discuss the preliminary findings, he said as he gathered up the papers. Shall we continue in an hour? I'd like to see the actual operation of the system. Sure, I nodded. I'll be in my office. Amyas left, and I stayed in the conference room trying to collect my thoughts. The situation was looking worse and worse. Vaughn was clearly not looking for ways to improve the current system, but for arguments to replace it altogether. I left the conference room intending to go to the cafeteria, but stopped when I heard voices coming from Elias's office. The door was ajar, and I recognized the voices of Elias and Vaughn. Definitely outdated architecture, Vaughn was saying. Too much handiwork, too much complex support. We could replace that with a modern cloud solution in 3 months. And the staff? Elias asked. How many developers would we need to support the new solution? A maximum of 5 people, Vaughn answered, mostly for customization and integration. Most of the support will be done by our team. Our team? I froze, listening more closely. And that will save us about $2 million a year in personnel costs, Elias continued, satisfied. Plus a reduction in equipment costs. Exactly, Vaughn confirmed. And the most interesting thing about Denby's architecture is some of its data processing algorithms. They're really innovative. I could integrate them into our platform, creating a unique offering for the market. So, we're not just saving money, we're getting a cut of your new product? Elias sounded pleased. That's exactly right. 15% of sales, as we discussed. And of course, TechCorp will be the first customer with a corresponding discount. I felt the blood rush to my face. They weren't just planning to replace my system. They were going to steal my designs, integrate them into Vaughn's product and sell them to other companies. And Elias would get a percentage of the sales. What about Denby? Elias asked. He seems tethered to his system. He's a good developer, Vaughn admitted, but he's too independent. People like that don't work well in a team and don't accept change. I wouldn't recommend keeping him after the transition to the new system. He's on the layoff list, Elias confirmed, along with most of the development department. We'll announce it next week after you finish your analysis and I present the reorganization plan to the board. Great. Vaughn's voice sounded pleased. I need 2 or 3 more days to fully understand his system and extract everything of value. After that, we can begin the migration process. Excellent, Elias said. I'm already anticipating the council's reaction when I present them with the savings figures. I backed away from the door, feeling the rage welling up inside me. They weren't even hiding their intentions. Elias was willing to throw away years of teamwork and fire dozens of people for the sake of pretty numbers in the quarterly report, and Vaughn was going to cash in on my designs. I walked quickly toward the restrooms, needing a moment of privacy to gather my thoughts. Locking myself in a stall, I breathed deeply, trying to calm myself down. So, facts. I'm scheduled to be fired in a week. Vaughn wants to steal my algorithms for his product. Elias will get a percentage of the sales. The system I spent 4 years building will be scrapped. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. No, that's not going to happen. I will not let them destroy my brainchild and steal my work. Exiting the restroom, I headed straight to my desk, ignoring the cafeteria and lunch. I had less than an hour before Vaughn returned, and I intended to make good use of that time. Lionel came up to me when I was already sitting at my computer, quickly typing in a code. "Hey, aren't you going to lunch?" he asked, then noticed the look on my face. "What's wrong?" I hesitated for only a second. Lionel was my friend, probably the only real friend I had in the company. He deserved to know the truth. "Elias and Vaughn are planning to lay off half the development department, including me," I said quietly, "and replace our system with Vaughn's product, using my algorithms." Lionel stared at me with his mouth open. Are you sure? I just overheard them talking. They weren't even hiding. Elias will get a percentage of the sales of Vaughn's new product, which will include the designs they stole from me." "Shit," Lionel exhaled. That's just stealing." "Exactly," I nodded, "and I'm not going to sit idly by." Lionel stared at my computer screen. "What are you doing?" "I'm backing up the system," I answered. "A complete one, including all the source code and databases." "But that's—" Lionel lowered his voice. "That's a violation of company policy. You can't copy the code." "Code that I wrote," I reminded him, "and that they're going to steal. I'm just, insurance." Lionel looked around, making sure no one could hear us. "Tegan, be careful. If you get caught—" "I know," I nodded, "but I don't have a choice. They're not just going to fire me, they're going to steal my job." Lionel watched in silence as I continued to work on copying the system. Finally he asked, "What about me? Am I on the layoff list too?" I looked up, meeting his eyes. "I don't know. They were only talking about the developers, but if they move the system to the cloud, then the system administrators won't be needed," he finished for me. "I see." He paused for a moment, then nodded decisively. "What can I do for you?" I smiled for the first time that day. "Make sure no one gets too close while I finish. Maybe look for information on Vaughn and his company. Anything we could use." "Will do," Lionel nodded. "But, Tegan, what are you planning?" I looked at the screen where the copying process continued. "I don't know exactly yet, but I'm not going to let them just steal my work and throw me out on the street." Lionel put his hand on my shoulder. "I'm with you, whatever you decide. Just don't do anything that could land you in jail, okay?" I hummed. "I'll try." Lionel left and I went back to work. The copying took another 15 minutes. When it was finished, I saved the archive to the encrypted external drive I always carried with me for backups of personal projects. Then I started going through the system's code, noting key components that Vaughn would likely want to explore further. If he's going to steal my algorithms, he's going to have to work very hard to get them right. Without documentation and my comments, many parts of the system were virtually unreadable to an outsider. I purposely designed some modules so that only I could easily navigate through them, not out of malice but for convenience. When you work alone, there is no need to make the code transparent to others. At 12:15, I saw Amyas Vaughn walking back to the conference room. He was walking, chatting cheerfully on the phone, his gait with the confidence of a man who had just closed a lucrative deal. I gathered my things and headed toward him, preparing to continue the collaboration. Now that I knew his true intentions, every word, every look, every question took on new meaning. Vaughn smiled when he saw me and put his phone away. "Ah, Tegan. Great, let's get on with it. I'd like to focus on data processing modules today. I'm particularly interested in your predictive analytics algorithms. Of course you are. The most innovative part of the system, which I have been developing for almost a year." "Of course," I replied with a fake smile, "but I must warn you that this is the most complex part of the system. There are many nuances that are not obvious without a thorough understanding of the overall architecture." "Don't worry," Vaughn patted me on the shoulder. "I'm a fast learner." "I'm sure you are," I thought, as I followed him into the conference room. The rest of the day passed in an intense game. I showed Vaughn the system, explained the principles of operation, but tried not to reveal the key details without which his attempts to reproduce my algorithms were doomed to failure. By 6 o'clock that evening, we had finished our review of the basic modules. Vaughn seemed pleased, though I noticed moments of irritation when he couldn't quite make sense of some parts of the code. "Impressive work, Tegan," he said, closing the laptop. "You really are a talented developer." "Thank you," I replied dryly. "Tomorrow I'd like to study the predictive analytics algorithms in more detail, and, if possible, to get access to the full source code for a deeper analysis." "Of course," I nodded. "I'll prepare everything necessary." Vaughn smiled and extended his hand for a handshake. "Good work today. See you tomorrow." I shook his hand, feeling disgusted. This man was planning to steal my work, to destroy the system I'd worked on for years, and yet he was smiling in my face. When Vaughn left, I was left sitting in the conference room, staring out the window at the evening Milwaukee skyline. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained as gray and heavy as my thoughts. The door opened and Cordelia Flint walked in. "I saw you were still here," she said, sitting down across from me. "How was your day with Vaughn?" "Enlightening," I answered. "You were right about him." Cordelia nodded. "I checked out his company, Von Tech. They specialize in creating custom solutions for corporate clients. Basically, they take open-source solutions, add a few chips, and sell them as a unique product at an inflated price. And now he wants to add my chips to his product," I shook my head. "And Elias is helping him with that." "For 15% of sales," Cordelia confirmed. "I saw the contract." I looked at her carefully. "Why are you helping me? It could cost you your job." Cordelia smiled slightly. "I believe in justice, Tegan. What Elias and Vaughn are doing is unethical and possibly illegal. I can't openly oppose it, but I can help you protect your job." "How?" "First, gather evidence. Record all conversations with Vaughn. Keep all correspondence. Second, if you have any personal knowledge of the system, find a way to prove it. Third," she lowered her voice, "be prepared to be fired as soon as next week. Do you have a plan?" I wondered. A plan? Not really. More like vague ideas about how to protect my job and keep Vaughn and Elias from stealing it. "I'm working on it," I answered. Cordelia studied me for a few seconds, then nodded. "Good. But remember, whatever you decide to do, make sure it doesn't break the law. Otherwise, you'll only make your situation more difficult." She stood up, about to leave, but stopped at the door. "And Tegan, be careful. Elias isn't a man to mess with if you don't have a good defense." When Cordelia left, I sat in the conference room for a long time, pondering her words. She was right. I need a plan. Not just a reaction to Elias and Vaughn's actions, but a well-thought-out strategy. I stood up and went to my desk to gather my things. The office was almost empty, with only Lionel in the far corner typing something on his computer. The week was coming to an end. 5 days of hard work with Amyas Vaughn. 5 days of pretense and innuendo. I had shown him the system, explained the basic principles, but avoided revealing key details and connections between components. He was smart, very smart, but the system was too complex to fully understand in such a short time. Vaughn was becoming increasingly irritable by the end of the week. His rehearsed smile appeared less and less often, giving way to a strained look and tightened lips, especially when he came across parts of the system that I had deliberately underdocumented. "How does this even work?" he'd ask, looking at a particularly confusing data processing module. "There's no commentary, no documentation." "This is the experimental part," I replied innocently. "I'm still tweaking it. But don't worry, it's stable and well integrated with the rest of the system." Vaughn frowned but couldn't object. After all, I was the creator of the system and only I knew all its nuances. By Friday, he seemed to realize he wasn't going to get all the secrets from me and became more reserved. Our sessions became shorter and our questions more general. I sensed he was changing his strategy. On Monday morning, exactly 1 week after our first meeting, I received a letter from Elias's secretary. "Mr. Denby, the CEO expects you in his office today at 11 o'clock for an important conversation. Attendance is mandatory." That's it. No explanation, no details. But I knew what it meant. Cordelia had warned me that layoffs would begin this week. Apparently, I was among the first. Lionel noticed me staring at the screen. "What's wrong?" he asked, approaching my desk. I silently showed him the letter. "Shit," he exhaled. "Do you think it's—" Vaughn must have reported that he'd gotten enough information about the system that they didn't need me anymore. Lionel looked around and lowered his voice. "Do you have a plan?" I had a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best I could come up with in a week. I kept a complete copy of the system, including all the source code and documentation, created hidden protocols that could make the system virtually unusable without my intervention, and I documented any conversations with Vaughn where he expressed interest in my algorithms. "There is something," I replied evasively. "But we'll see what Elias has to say first." "Be careful," Lionel warned. "I heard him yelling at Martinez from finance yesterday. All the guy did was ask about the possible risks of switching to a new system, and Elias almost fired him on the spot." I nodded. The atmosphere in the office had gotten even more tense over the past week. People were whispering, avoiding attention, and trying to keep out of sight of the management. Everyone knew that change was coming, and no one wanted to be a victim of it. I spent the rest of the time before the meeting going over the system code and making sure that all my insurance was in place. If Elias was really going to fire me and turn the system over to Vaughn, he would soon discover that it wasn't as easy as he thought. At 10 hours and 55 minutes, I closed all programs, shut down my computer, and headed for the CEO's office. On the way, I noticed Cordelia coming out of the meeting room. She caught my gaze and nodded faintly, so she knew what was about to happen too. Elias's secretary, a young woman with perfect hair and flawless makeup, greeted me with a polite smile. "Mr. Denby, the CEO is expecting you. Please come in." I entered a spacious office with panoramic windows overlooking downtown Milwaukee. Hambert Elias was sitting at a massive dark wood desk, looking over some documents. Next to him, in the visitor's chair, sat Amias Vaughn with his usual smug smile on his face. "Ah, Tegan, come in." Elias looked up. "Have a seat." I sat down in the chair across from the desk, feeling my back muscles tense. The atmosphere in the office was tense, despite Elias's friendly tone. "I suppose you can guess why I called you in," he began, folding his hands on the desk. "I have my guesses," I answered flatly. "Then I'll get right to the point." Elias nodded. "Tech Corp is entering a new phase of development. We are reorganizing the company, optimizing processes, and implementing modern technological solutions." He paused, apparently waiting for my reaction, but I remained silent, keeping a neutral expression on my face. As part of this reorganization, Elias continued, we have decided to move to a new data management system. Amias and his team will provide us with a modern, scalable solution to replace the current system. And my role in that? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Elias wrinkled his nose slightly, as if he was uncomfortable with the next words. Unfortunately, there is no suitable position for you in the new company structure. We are forced to terminate our cooperation. That's all. That's it. 4 years of work, sleepless nights, solved problems, created a system from scratch, and all ends with this dry phrase. I understand, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. When? Today will be your last day of work, Elias answered. Human Resources has already prepared all the necessary paperwork. You'll be compensated according to your contract. I looked at Vaughn, who was watching me with ill-concealed interest. And you think you can replace the current system without any problems? I asked him directly. Absolutely, Vaughn nodded with confidence. We've done a thorough analysis of your system and developed a migration plan. The process will take about 3 months, but it will be done in parallel, without interrupting your current work. 3 months? I couldn't hold back a skeptical smile. A system that I have been creating and developing for 4 years, integrated into all the company's processes, taking into account all the peculiarities of the business, and you plan to replace it in 3 months. We use modern methodologies and tools, Vaughn parried. Most of the functionality will be available in a month. The remaining time will be spent migrating historical data and customizing specific processes. I turned to Elias. Mr. Elias, I must warn you that this system is much more complex than it appears at first glance. It contains many interrelated components, some of which are not fully documented due to their experimental nature. That's why we are moving to a standardized solution, Elias replied. A company should not be dependent on one person. It's a business risk I can't tolerate. It's not about me, I objected. It's about a system that was designed specifically for TechCorp, taking into account all the company's specifics. Any standard solution would require significant adaptation of business processes, which could lead to serious problems. Elias was beginning to show signs of irritation. Mr. Denby, the decision has already been made. The board of directors has approved the reorganization plan. We appreciate your work and contribution to the company, but we have to move forward. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. Can I at least suggest a handover period? 2 weeks to help document the system and prepare for the migration? Elias and Vaughn exchanged glances. That's not necessary, Vaughn said. We already have all the information we need. We've done an exhaustive analysis of the system. In a week? I didn't hide my sarcasm. I've been building this system for 4 years, and even I can't say I know every aspect of it. Some components require a special approach, a certain knowledge. Mr. Denby, Elias interrupted me. I appreciate your concern for the company, but the decision is final. Amias is confident that his team can handle the migration, and I trust his expertise. I looked at both of them, feeling the anger building up inside. They didn't realize what they were getting into, or they did, but they didn't care. Elias wanted to show quick savings and improve financial performance, and Vaughn wanted access to my algorithms for his product. They didn't care about the real consequences for the company. Okay, I said finally. If the decision is final, I'll accept it. But at least let me document the most critical components of the system. It'll only take a day or two. That won't be necessary, Vaughn repeated. We've already documented everything. Not everything, I objected. There are components that I never showed you because they weren't part of our discussions. Disaster recovery modules, security protocols, backup systems. Elias frowned. Why didn't you show these components to Amias? Because he didn't ask about them, I answered. He was interested in the data processing algorithms, not the security infrastructure. Vaughn looked annoyed. I asked for full access to the entire system. If you were intentionally hiding any components, I wasn't hiding anything, I countered. I answered your questions and showed you what you asked for. But the system is too complex to cover everything in a week. That's why I'm offering extra time for documentation. Elias clearly hesitated. My information about the hidden components of the system made him think about the risks. One day, he finally said, you can stay until tomorrow and document these critical components. Amyas will work with you to make sure everything is accounted for. Vaughn wanted to object, but Elias stopped him with a gesture. It's a reasonable precaution, Amyas. We can't risk the security of the data. Vaughn nodded reluctantly, but his gaze directed at me was cold. All right, I agreed. I'll have all the necessary documentation ready by tomorrow. Good. Elias stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. Human Resources will contact you later today for the paperwork. And, Mr. Denby, I expect you to handle the handoff professionally. That last phrase sounded like a warning. Elias must have feared that I might somehow sabotage the migration process. Of course, I replied flatly. I always act in the company's best interest. When I left Elias's office, I went straight to my desk. Lionel was there, tapping his fingers nervously on the keyboard. Well? He asked when he saw me. Fired, I answered briefly. Today is the last day. Or rather, tomorrow. I've knocked off one more day for documenting critical components. Shit, Lionel exhaled. They'd really done it. And you doubted it? I sat down at the computer and turned it on. Elias gets his savings. Vaughn gets my algorithms. Everyone's happy, except for the ones who get thrown out on the street. So what now? I looked around. The office was unusually quiet. Many desks were empty. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who had received a termination notice today. Now I have to decide what to do next, I said quietly. What do you mean? I looked at Lionel. I have a choice. I can just quit, take my compensation, and look for a new job, or, Lionel tensed. Or I can make sure they realize what a mistake they've made, I finished. Lionel looked around nervously. Tegan, you're not going to do something illegal, are you? Of course not, I shook my head. I'm just going to be honest. The system does have components that aren't fully documented, and if they want to replace it without understanding all the nuances, they're going to run into problems. And if they ask you to fix those problems, for the appropriate fee, why not? I shrugged. But I doubt Elias or Vaughn will admit their mistakes so quickly. They're overconfident. What about the others? Lionel lowered his voice. A lot of people could get hurt if the system fails. That was the key question. There it was, the internal conflict that had been gnawing at me for the last week. I could let Elias and Vaughn suffer for their own stupidity. They deserved it. But others would suffer along with them. Rank-and-file employees, customers, company partners. I was silent, staring at the computer screen that displayed the interface of the system I had spent 4 years building and developing, my brainchild, my pride. And now I had to decide its fate. I don't know, I finally admitted. Part of me wants to just walk away and let them deal with the consequences. They deserve that. But the other part, hell, I've invested too much in this system to watch them destroy it. And it's not the customer's fault that the company has an idiot director, Lionel added. I nodded. He was right. Whatever my feelings about Elias and Vaughn, I couldn't let innocent people get hurt. Okay, I said, making a decision. I'll document the system. Real documentation that will help them avoid disaster. But no more than that. If they decide to replace it anyway, that's their choice and their responsibility. Lionel looked relieved. It's the right decision, Tegan. Maybe. I wasn't so sure. What about you? Have you been summoned too? Lionel shook his head. Not yet, no. But I've heard that the IT department will be cut back gradually as we move to the new system. So it'll probably be my turn in a couple of months. That's plenty of time to find a new job, I said. Yes, but Lionel hesitated. I don't want to leave. I like this company. I like the people. I mean, I liked them before Elias came here. I understood how he felt. Until recently, Tech Corp was a great place to work. Friendly atmosphere, interesting projects, good balance between innovation and stability. And all that was changing before our eyes because of the decisions of the new management. Maybe all is not lost yet, I said, though I didn't believe it myself. If their plan failed, the board of directors might reconsider Elias's decisions. I doubt it, Lionel sighed. Guys like Elias usually know how to present even failures as successes. He'll find a scapegoat and get away with it. I looked at the computer screen again. Lionel was right. Elias isn't the kind of man who admits his mistakes. If the system fails after I'm gone, he'll accuse me of sabotage or incompetence. And if the transition to the new system took longer or was more expensive than planned, he'd find a way to explain it away with external factors. But maybe there was another way? A way to protect the system and the people who depended on it without letting Elias and Vaughn get away with it? I began to ponder the hidden protocols I'd implemented into the system over the past week. They weren't malicious, more like additional layers of defense that required certain knowledge to properly manage. If Vaughn tried to replace the system without understanding those protocols, he would run into problems. Not catastrophic, but serious enough to make him and Elias reconsider their plans. And what if I documented those protocols, but not for Vaughn, but for someone else? Someone I could trust and who could intervene if the situation became critical. Lionel, I said, turning to him, you know the system better than anyone after me. Not all the code, but the infrastructure, the servers, the databases. Well, yes, he nodded uncertainly. Why? I want to document the system not only for Vaughn, but for you as well. Full documentation, with all the nuances and hidden features. Lionel tensed. Why? Insurance, I answered. If Vaughn does start replacing the system and runs into problems, you'll know how to fix them. It could save the company some serious losses. And make me indispensable, Lionel added understandingly. Protect my job. Exactly, I nodded. Vaughn's not a system administrator. He's a software consultant. He doesn't know how our infrastructure works, but you do. Lionel thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. I'm in, but only if it doesn't hurt the company or the customers. No harm, I assured him. Just protection against incompetent decisions. I turned to the computer and opened a new document. It was time to start the real documentation, not the kind Elias and Vaughn expected to see, but the kind that really explained how the system worked in all its aspects. The decision had been made. I won't let Elias and Vaughn steal my work and ruin what I've spent years creating. But I would also not allow innocent people to suffer because of their incompetence. It was a delicate balance, but I was sure I could find it. Get to work, I said, starting to type. We don't have much time. It had been 2 weeks since I had been fired. 2 weeks of silence and waiting. I settled into a small cafe near my apartment with my laptop and a cup of coffee and watched from afar. Lionel texted me regularly, keeping me informed of developments. Amyas Vaughn and his team had begun the data migration process as soon as I left. They acted quickly, too quickly. Vaughn wanted to impress Elias and the board, to show that the transition to the new system was smooth and efficient. They didn't even do a full test before launching the first module, Lionel wrote. Just migrated some functionality and went live. Completely absurd. I wasn't surprised. The rush was predictable. Elias wanted to show quick results, and Vaughn wanted access to my algorithms as soon as possible. But it was that haste that was becoming their biggest mistake. The system I had created was a complex organism with many interconnected components. It couldn't be taken apart piece by piece without careful planning and understanding of all those connections. Vaughn thought he could simply isolate the algorithms he was interested in and integrate them into his platform, but he didn't know about the hidden protocols I had activated before I left. These protocols were not malicious code in the traditional sense. They didn't destroy data or block access. They simply provided an extra layer of system integrity checking by monitoring for unusual access patterns and changes in data structure. When potentially dangerous behavior was detected, for example, attempts to extract key algorithms without preserving their context, the protocols automatically activated a high-security mode. In this mode, the system became incredibly demanding on resources, slowed down considerably, and generated numerous warnings. To the average user, this looked like technical problems. To a knowledgeable person, it looked like a defense mechanism that required the right approach. And now, based on Lionel's reports, those protocols were starting to kick in. "The system is slowing down," he wrote this morning. "Vaughn is freaking out. Says the servers are overloaded even though the CPU utilization is only 30%. They don't understand what's wrong." I smiled, sipping my coffee. Of course they didn't understand. They thought my system was just a collection of code and databases that could be taken apart and reassembled at will. They didn't realize that I had created not just a program, but an ecosystem capable of defending itself. The ringing of the phone interrupted my musings. "Lionel." "You won't believe what's happening here," he said without greeting, his voice excited. "The system's completely shut down. Nothing's been working for 2 hours. Clients are calling. Partners are panicking. Elias is frantic." "And Vaughn?" I asked, trying to hide the satisfaction in my voice. "Locked in a conference room with his team. They're trying to figure out what's going on, but so far to no avail. Elias has already burst in on them twice, demanding an explanation." "What are they saying?" "The official story is some kind of conflict between the old and new systems. But I heard Vaughn accuse you of sabotage. Said you deliberately left traps in the code." I chuckled. Typical, blaming others for your own mistakes. But technically, Vaughn wasn't that far from the truth. I had indeed left traps, though not in the sense he meant. "What's going on now?" I asked. "Elias has called an emergency management meeting. They're discussing options. Audra suggested that I contact you, but Vaughn is against it. He says he can handle it on his own." "Of course he does." I couldn't help but chuckle. "He doesn't want to admit he doesn't understand the system." "Tegan," Lionel's voice grew serious. "Some customers are already talking about canceling their contracts if the problem isn't solved by tomorrow morning. That could really hit the company hard." I thought about it. My plan was to show Elias and Vaughn their mistake, to make them realize the value of the system and my work. But I didn't want to destroy the company or harm innocent people. "What about the documentation I left you?" I asked. "Have you tried using it?" "I've tried hinting to Vaughn about certain aspects, but he won't listen. He thinks the problem is some kind of malicious code you supposedly implemented." I sighed. Vaughn's stubbornness could cost the company dearly. "Okay," I decided. "If they contact me, I'll help, but only on my terms." "What terms?" Lionel asked curiously. "You'll see," I answered. "In the meantime, just watch and keep me informed." We said goodbye, and I went back to my coffee, thinking about the situation. Part of me felt satisfied that my plan had worked. Elias and Vaughn had faced the consequences of their hasty decisions, but another part worried about the company and the people who might have gotten hurt. I didn't want revenge for revenge's sake. I wanted justice and recognition of the value of my work, and the moment for that seemed to be approaching. Not 2 hours later, the phone rang again. This time, the number was a stranger. "Tegan Denby?" The woman's voice sounded tense. "Yeah, it's me." "This is Janet Morris, Mr. Elias's secretary. The CEO of Tech Corp would like to meet with you today, if possible. It's urgent." I paused for a moment to let him know I was considering the offer. What exactly does Mr. Elias want to discuss? I. The secretary hesitated. I wasn't given any details, but it has to do with the current technical problems in the company. I understand. I paused again. Okay, I can meet with him today, but not at the company office. Suggest he meet at the Riverview Cafe on the waterfront at 6 o'clock this evening. Janet seemed surprised by my conditions, but quickly agreed. I'll tell Mr. Elias. Thank you for your time. After hanging up, I called Cordelia Flint. She picked up after the first ring. I've been expecting your call, she said without greeting. The situation was becoming critical. Elias just invited me to a meeting, I informed her. What's going on from a legal point of view? The clients are starting to talk about breach of contract, Cordelia answered. The two largest partners have already sent formal complaints. If the problem isn't resolved within 24 hours, they have the right to cancel their contracts and demand compensation. And Vaughn? Elias? What's their position? Vaughn claims the problem is your code, that you deliberately sabotage the system. Elias supports him publicly so far, but in private conversations he's starting to have doubts, especially after the CTO of Global Partners asked him directly why they fired the creator of the system before the migration was complete. I smiled. It's good to have someone asking the right questions. What would you advise me from a legal standpoint? I asked. If Elias offers to go back and fix the problem? Demand a written contract with clear terms, Cordelia answered without hesitation. And don't accept a position as a regular employee. In the current situation, you can claim to be an independent consultant or even a partner. You have a strong negotiating position. Use it. Thank you, I said sincerely. Your help is invaluable. I just want to see justice done, she replied. Good luck at the meeting. The Riverview Cafe was half empty at that hour of the evening. I chose a table in the corner overlooking the river and the sunset sky. The perfect place for important negotiations, private enough, but still public. Hambert Elias showed up at 6 sharp, 1 minute to the minute. Always punctual, always in the perfect suit. But today, his usual self-confidence was replaced by tension. The dark circles under his eyes and the slightly creased collar of his shirt suggested that the last few hours had been hard on him. Mr. Denby, he sat across from me, trying to keep his tone businesslike. Thank you for seeing me. Mr. Elias, I nodded. To what do I owe this unexpected invitation? He grimaced slightly, realizing I wasn't going to make it easy for him. I assume you're aware of the company's current technical problems. I've heard something about it, I answered neutrally. Any difficulties with data migration? Elias took a deep breath, clearly struggling with irritation. Mr. Denby, let's be blunt. The system you created has come to a virtual standstill. Mr. Vaughn and his team can't determine the cause of the problem. We're incurring significant losses and risking the loss of key customers. That's unfortunate, I said. But what can I do to help? I no longer work at TechCorp. We'd like to bring you in as a consultant, Elias replied, trying to keep his voice steady. To solve current problems. Consultant, I repeated, as if tasting the word. That's an interesting suggestion. How does Mr. Vaughn feel about it? As I remembered, he was sure he had the system all figured out. Elias tensed even more. Mr. Vaughn has revised his assessment of the system's complexity. We all agree that your expertise would be extremely useful in the current situation. I remained silent as I watched Elias struggle with his own pride. It wasn't easy for him to admit error, even indirectly. What terms are you offering? I finally asked. A standard consulting contract, he answered quickly, as if afraid I would refuse. An hourly fee, a bonus for successful problem solving. We're willing to discuss the rate. I shook my head slowly. I'm afraid that doesn't suit me, Mr. Elias. Name your price, he said, a note of desperation in his voice. We're ready to negotiate. It's not about money, I said firmly. It's about principle. I built this system, put 4 years of my life into it, and then I was fired with no respect for my work. What's more, my designs were going to be used in a commercial product without my consent or compensation. Elias turned pale. He clearly didn't expect me to know about his arrangements with Vaughn. I don't know what you mean. Please, I held up my hand, stopping him. Let's not waste time with denials. I have proof of these plans. But that's not what's important right now. What's important is that the system needs my help, and I'm willing to provide it. But on my terms. Elias remained silent, waiting for him to continue. I want partner status, I said. Not a consultant, not an employee, but a partner in the company, with a share and a say in decisions about technology strategy. That's... Elias hesitated. This is an unprecedented demand. As is the situation the company finds itself in, I countered. The system I created is TechCorp's key asset. Without it, the company cannot function, which is now being proved in practice. I want guarantees that my work will be protected and appreciated. Elias looked at me with a mixture of anger and despair. He realized that I had backed him into a corner. The clients demanded an immediate solution. Vaughn was powerless, and I was the only one who could fix it. I can't make this decision alone, he said finally. It would have to be approved by the board of directors. Of course, I nodded, but you can recommend that they accept my proposal. And while they're discussing it, I can start working on rebuilding the system, say, as a gesture of goodwill. Elias hesitated, weighing his options. What exactly happened to the system? He asked bluntly. Vaughn claims you left some traps in the code. No traps, I shook my head. It's just that the system has a complex architecture with many interconnected components. I warned you about that. Trying to extract individual modules without understanding their context activated the built-in data protection protocols. Protection protocols? Elias frowned. The documentation didn't say anything about them. Not in the documentation Vaughn had seen, I agreed. I offered additional time to fully document the system, but I was turned down. Elias looked as if he wanted to argue something, but changed his mind. Instead, he asked, "How long will it take to get the system back up and running?" "Assuming I have full access and freedom of action, about 12 hours, I answered. "Probably less if the damage isn't too severe." Elias nodded, accepting the decision. "Good. I'll present your proposal to the board of directors and recommend its acceptance. In the meantime, we'll set up a temporary consultant contract with maximum authority. Can you start work today?" "Right away, if necessary," I replied. "But I need written confirmation of your intentions regarding the partnership." "You'll have it by morning," Elias promised. "I'll contact the lawyers right after our meeting." We shook hands, sealing the agreement. In Elias's eyes, I saw a mixture of respect and underlying anger. He wasn't used to losing, but now he had no choice. An hour later, I was already in the TechCorp office, sitting at my old desk. All around me were technicians, including Lionel and, to my surprise, Audra Webb, who, as it turned out, hadn't been fired yet. "I'm glad you're back," she said quietly as the others prepared the equipment. "I was against your firing." "But I didn't object too strongly," I remarked without much anger. "We all have responsibilities, Tegan," she said seriously. "Mortgages, families, plans. Not everyone can afford to be principled." I nodded, understanding her position. After all, I was fighting not only for myself, but for anyone who might be affected by Elias's rash decisions. "Where's Vaughn?" I asked, not seeing the counselor among those present. "In the conference room with Elias," Lionel answered. "They're, discussing the situation." Judging from his tone, the discussion was quite tense. I turned to the computer and started working. The system was in worse shape than I expected. Vaughn and his team, trying to bypass the defense protocols, had only exacerbated the problem. They tried to force a data migration, not realizing that the system interpreted this as an unauthorized access attempt. It took me 2 hours to stabilize the core components and restore basic functionality. It took another 4 hours to fully restore the system and roll back the failed changes made by Vaughn's team. By midnight, the system was stable again. All key functions were available, and customer data was still intact. I spent another hour beefing up the defenses and documenting my actions for future reference. When I finally leaned back in my chair, announcing the work was complete, the office erupted in spontaneous applause. The technicians who had stayed overnight to help with the recovery looked exhausted but happy. Even Audra allowed herself a smile. "You saved the company," Lionel said, shaking my hand. "Elias should recognize that." "We'll see," I replied, under no illusions. Pride is a strong motivator, especially for people like him, but I'd underestimated the force of circumstances. In the morning, I was greeted not only by Elias, but also by the chairman of the board of directors, an older gentleman named Robert Gray, whom I'd only seen in corporate photos. "Mr. Denby," Gray shook my hand with genuine warmth. "On behalf of the board of directors, I want to thank you for your efforts to save our company from potential disaster." Elias stood beside me, his face impenetrable, but I noticed how nervously he fiddled with his cufflinks. "We have reviewed your proposal," Gray continued, "and the board has unanimously approved it. We're offering you partnership status in the company, with a 5% stake and authority over technology strategy." I could barely contain my surprise. 5% was more than I'd expected, and much more than I'd anticipated discussing with Elias. "That's a generous offer," I said cautiously. "May I ask what was the reason for this decision?" Gray cast a quick glance at Elias, then turned back to me. "Let's just say we overestimated the situation in light of recent events. Your system has turned out to be a far more valuable asset than we realized, and your skills are irreplaceable." I nodded, accepting the explanation, though I suspected there was more to it than that. Perhaps the board was beginning to doubt Elias's competence, or, more likely, major clients were pressing for assurances about the system's stability. "I accept your offer," I said, "provided I have full control over the system and veto power over any decisions regarding its architecture and development." "Of course," Gray agreed. "It will be stipulated in the contract. Our lawyers are already preparing the documents." "What about Mr. Vaughn?" I asked, looking at Elias. "His contract has been terminated," Gray answered dryly. "By mutual consent." Elias twitched slightly but remained silent. I realized that his position in the company had been seriously eroded. Perhaps the board of directors was reviewing not only the technology strategy, but also the management team. "In that case, I look forward to working with you," I said, shaking Gray's hand. "And I look forward to working together for the good of the company." A week later, I was sitting in my new office, a spacious room overlooking the river that had previously belonged to the deputy CEO. A sign on the wall read, "Tegan Denby, Technical Partner." In front of me lay the IT reorganization paperwork that awaited my approval. Elias was proposing a 20% reduction in staff. I was insisting on retaining key people and hiring additional developers to improve the system. Our dispute was to be resolved at the next board meeting, but I was confident in my position. The system was stable, the customers were happy, and my company's stock had already risen in value due to the positive financial outlook. I was no longer just an employee. I was now a co-owner with voting rights and influence over the future of the company. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. Lionel peeked into the office with a wide smile. "Ready for lunch, partner?" he asked jokingly. Lionel was now the head of the systems administration department, a promotion he'd gotten on my recommendation. He'd earned it not only by his competence but also by his loyalty in difficult times. "Of course," I stood up from the table. "We need to discuss the new infrastructure. I have ideas on how to improve the backup system." It's always work, Lionel shook his head. Even now that you're the big boss. Especially now, I replied as I left the office. The system needs constant attention and development. It's like a child. It always needs nurturing. A child that saved your career and gave you the best view of the office, Lionel remarked. I smiled without arguing. He was right. The system I'd created and protected hadn't just brought me back to the company. It had changed my position from employee to partner and co-owner. As I passed Elias's office, I noticed that he was sitting at his desk, absorbed in his papers. Our gazes met through the glass partition. For a moment there was a flicker of dislike in his eyes, but he quickly got over the emotion and nodded at me with formal courtesy. I returned the same nod. There would never be true trust or friendship between us, but we could work together for the common goal of the company's success. After all, I was now as interested in that success as he was. Stepping out of the building onto the sunny street, I inhaled a full breath. Life had taken an unexpected turn that I couldn't have foreseen 2 weeks ago. I had gone from a laid-off employee to a partner in the company, with influence and power I couldn't have dreamed of before. "What are you thinking about?" Lionel asked, as we walked toward a small restaurant nearby. "About how quickly things have changed," I answered. "Not so long ago I was just a technician, and now you're living proof that competence and integrity do matter," Lionel finished. "You know, a lot of people in the company think you're a hero." I grinned, embarrassed by that characterization. I was just protecting my job and protecting the company from incompetent decisions. "That's what heroes do," Lionel shrugged. "Protect what they believe in." We entered the restaurant where we were greeted by Audra Webb, waiting at a table by the window. She was now the Director of Customer Relations, another promotion that had occurred since my return. "Finally," she said with a smile. "I thought you'd gotten bogged down in a discussion of server configurations and forgotten about lunch." "Almost," I admitted, sitting down at the table. But Lionel reminded me that even technical geniuses need to eat once in a while. We laughed, and I felt the tension of the last few weeks finally let go. The system was safe, my position in the company secure, and my future promising.